Okay. So let me start with the session. Okay. So I hope everybody can able to hear me loud and clear, right? So just please give me a confirmation. Okay, good. So welcome everyone to 20th Surat MuleSoft Meetup. In today's meetup, we will going to discuss about Anypoint DataGraph. So MuleSoft has recently introduced a new feature that is known as Anypoint DataGraph. And Anypoint DataGraph is nothing; it's a managed service, like has been recently launched by MuleSoft as a part of Anypoint platform, basically. Okay, so we will discuss more about that, and we will discuss about what are the different use cases where we can use Anypoint DataGraph and what is the need of Anypoint DataGraph, basically. So we're going to discuss that. So I will not take more time because I know today it's Sunday, so we will try to complete everything in within the 1 hour or maybe less than that. Okay. So about myself, currently I am a Surat and the Nasik MuleSoft Meetup leader and the MuleSoft ambassador. I have overall 13 years of experience in the integration and the API technology, and I am working as I am a certified MuleSoft integration architect and the platform architect, basically. And currently I am working as various digital transformation and migration projects related to MuleSoft. So Nitish is not available today, so I will skip this. So agenda, we will discuss about what is a GraphQL. Then we will discuss about Anypoint data graph. We will discuss about few use cases, and finally, we will have a trivia quiz. We will going to select three winners, basically, and they will get a voucher, a training voucher, basically. Okay. So let's understand what is a GraphQL. So GraphQL is nothing. It's a graph query language. It is an open source query language for your REST API. So initially, this GraphQL has been developed by a Facebook in 2012 before releasing it publicly to 2015. So initially, Facebook developed this particular GraphQL for their application. Okay, in 2012, and later they made it open source, and they have released it publicly in 2015. So basically, one of the advantage, one of the main logic behind the GraphQL, basically you can send the query to your REST API and you can fetch the required data, basically. So basically what you can do, with using GraphQL, you can call a multiple APIs with a single request. Apart from that, you can request how many field you want using that GraphQL query. Basically, if you want two fields, so you can send the request, I want these two fields, right? And if you want three fields, you can send the request, I want these three fields, using this graph query language, basically, right? So as you know, REST API is mostly, it's one of the powerful and the resource oriented and the well structured approach, basically. So basically, when the data increases, when number of APIs increases, right, the complexity increases. No, so when the data is complex, it is not possible to fetch all the data within single request, as it involve various operation and route get more complex. So basically what happens, sometimes you have to do the orchestration of the call for an application. I will take one simple example. I will take the banking example. In banking, what happens, we have accounts, right? We have a transaction, we have a balance. So if you want to fetch your accounts, if you want to fetch your balances, if you want to fetch your transaction, so you have to send the three requests. But using GraphQL, what you can do, you can send the single request. Using that single request, you can fetch all the data from accounts, transactions, balances, statement, whatever you want. So GraphQL is very useful in such cases, and the structured data in the form of graph with a powerful query syntax language for traversing, retrieving, and modifying the data. So right now, the GraphQL is capable of traversing, you can retrieve or you can fetch any kind of data you want, and even you can modify the data. Okay, so even the GraphQL is also capable of aggregating the data and return the predictable result to the client, basically. So basically, when I say predictable result, so generally what happens in typical scenario, let you have a REST API, basically, and you send the request to REST API and you got 10 15 fields. Even you don't require all the fields, right? You just require 5 fields out of that, right? But even you are getting the 15 fields within the GraphQL, or within using GraphQL, you can request for 5 fields. I just want this particular 5 fields, right? You can fetch these 5 fields from the backend systems, right? So those kind of things you can like achieve from your GraphQL basically. Apart from that, even you can do the sorting of data. So in order, if you are requesting like first name first, last name second, like age third, so in same way you get the data. Even if you are requesting age at the first level, then first name, then last name, so you will get the like response in the same order. So you can do the sorting of your fields also basically using this particular GraphQL. Okay. So basically, MuleSoft has come up with something called Anypoint DataGraph. Okay. So basically, Anypoint DataGraph is basically, it's a component, it's a part of Anypoint platform, which allow you to unify a multiple APIs into single data service. So basically, what does this mean? So basically, you can unify all your APIs, all your like you can unify the multiple APIs to create a single data service. So basically, you can have a single URL where you can send the request to fetch the data from the multiple APIs. Okay. So with Anypoint Data Graph, you can reuse multiple API in a single request, right? You can call like you can call the multiple, you can request the data from multiple APIs using a single request basically, right? So let's consider like enterprise architect can easily unify your APIs into a one data service. Even you don't have to write a single line of code basically, like, so enterprise architect like can design the API or can unify the API into a single data service without writing a single code. And developer can consume a multiple APIs from the data service in single GraphQL request. So basically, you are able to fetch the data from multiple service using a single GraphQL request basically. Okay. So Anypoint Data Graph is developed on the basis of GraphQL only. It has been implemented on the basis of GraphQL only. Any question? I can, let me check if I have any question. Any question? Are you getting right? What uh, what are the things we can get from the GraphQL basically? Okay. So I will give one example. So let consider like you are working with the organization, you are working with the enterprise organization. They having very complex systems, like they have a 300 400 systems. And like, as you know, like if you have a complex systems, like if you have a multiple system, your number of APIs will increase, your complexity will get increased basically, right? So every time, like if you're work, there can be a multiple consumer for each and every APIs basically, right? And each consumer may have to consume the APIs in a different way. Like some consumer will like consume the XYZ API, some consumer will consume the PK, like some other APIs. Like the way of consuming or way of fetching the data may be different. So some consumer may require some X other fields, like some consumer may require some different field, right? In that case, what you do, like generally at a UX layer or experience layer, you create a like a channel specific API, like for mobile application or for for like web application. In that case, what you can do, you can make it of GraphQL. So basically, you don't have to create like like channel specific API, or every time you have to create, you don't have to create a new API, and even you don't have to do the orchestration of the API, and even you don't have to do the choreography of API basically. So simply what you can do, you can create a GraphQL, you can send the query to the as a request, and from request, like data graph will do the choreography and orchestration of data. It will fetch the result from the backend API, and then finally it will aggregate the data and it will send back to the customer. So that is how the Anypoint data graph works basically. So it is very useful when your systems, when number of systems are more and very complex, and your API network is very complex and very bigger. Like every time you cannot create a new API, so it's better you unify all your API into a data service using Anypoint data graph. And like what, like different projects may require different field, so they can request accordingly basically. Okay. So what are the like benefits? So first, unify API into powerful data service. As I mentioned, like you can unify all your data, so network of your API into a single data service without writing any code. So MuleSoft provide Anypoint DataGraph as a managed service, where you can do all your configuration. Basically, you don't have to write a single line of code for unifying your API. Basically, serve the data from multiple API instantly by securing the sharing data service. So basically, it is also like it is very simple to consume the data from multiple service. Like even you don't have to do the orchestration of call, even you don't have to do the aggregation of data. This everything will be handled by a Anypoint data graph. Basically, so basically you just have to pass the query: I want the data from accounts, I want this data from transaction, I want this data from balances. You just send that query, you send that query to Anypoint data graph. Anypoint data graph will do the orchestration of call. It will reach to accounts API, it will reach to transaction API, it will reach to balance API. It will aggregate the data and it will send that aggregate response back to the client. Okay, so that is how you can do consume many APIs in the single request, which I've discussed just now. So basically, you can say like you can just send a single request. So from where you can like do the Anypoint data can do the orchestration or the choreograph of the call. It can call the multiple APIs like account transactions, you know. So even like you can do the cross API calls also. So basically, there might be possibility like your account transactions and balance exist in the same API, but your customer data exists in other API, basically, right? So you can also do the cross API calls and you can aggregate that data also. We will see all this example and reach new level of the productivity. So as I mentioned, you don't have to write any code, you know, you don't have to write any code to pass the data from multiple API, and you can deploy, or you can as I mentioned, this data graph is nothing, it's a managed service, and like you can deploy this as a SaaS application, and like you don't have to worry about anything. Like you don't have to worry about the maintenance, like don't have to worry about the upgradation, like you don't have to worry about the patching and all those things, because as I mentioned, it's a managed service basically. Okay, any question? So like mom, like there are also subscription like for that, you know, I am like you need to connect MuleSoft. Yeah, you can have a separate subscription for that. It's kind of, it's a managed service, right? So you can buy, it's not about platinum or like titanium. Like you need, like this is the additional component which you have to buy, and like for further detail you need to contact MuleSoft sales team, Mohammed. Yeah, it will be subscription basically. It is not come at free. Okay, so let me go back. There are some like if you know, like Anypoint data graph comes with some limitations also. So like currently Anypoint data graph just support like APIs with raml and open API specification. So it, like it can call only the APIs like we have with the get method, right? You know, so it can call the API with only get method basically. Okay, then it can contain up to 255 APIs per unified schema, like, you know, up to 250 APIs. So up to 250 APIs or 250 application per unified schema, and like up to 16,000 fields per unified schema. So up to, like, if you consider 250 API, and 250 API must not exist more than 60,000 field per unified schema. Okay, a maximum you can do 150 concurrent call or ongoing call per unified schema. You cannot exceed 155, more than 150 concurrent call basically. The 5-second timeout per call. So it take like, if like data graph is calling the API which taking more than 5 seconds, it will get timeout basically. And maximum of 5 MB of data response data per call. Like it should not exceed the data, like response data more than 5 MB basically. Okay, so generally you can notice that, like, you know, so if your API is not performing well, like, you know, which is taking more time, like, you know, in that case you cannot add those API into your unified schema, because if you see, there are some restriction and there are some limitation of Anypoint data graph, and you have to ensure that, like, if you are adding any API into your unified schema or into any unified schema or Anypoint data graph, you have to ensure that the downstream API give the response before 5 seconds. If it's taking 10 seconds or 12 seconds, it will get timeout. And also ensure that the response data, it should not be more than 5 MB. Like even you are like, there might be possibility you are calling a multiple APIs, right? And then finally you are aggregating those data, it should not exceed 5 MB, otherwise it will give the error. Okay, the overall total timeout 30-second timeout per query. So basically, if client is sending the request, that request may have a call of multiple APIs basically, right? So it may call account, it has to fetch the data from transactions, it have to fetch the data from balances. So everything has to be completed in the 30 seconds. Otherwise, the request will time out. So you can request up to 100 fields in the per query. Basically, you can go up to depth of 100 fields basically. So not more than 100 fields. You can request not more than 100 fields per request basically. Okay. Any question on this?
Jitendra, I have a question.
Yeah, Rajiv.
Yeah. So, as you said that we need a separate license to use this
Yes.
endpoint graph, right? So,
Yeah.
my question is like, would this service use same vCore what we have licensed,
No,
or it will
no,
be
no,
a
no, no,
separate?
no, no. It doesn't use any vehicle. Can you go on mute, Rajiv? Because you're so Rajiv, it doesn't use any vCore. It is a managed service, basically. Like we have a API manager, right? So similar like API manager or Anypoint DataGraph is a managed service, so you don't have to worry about the underlying hardware or underlying vCore. So like like underlying scaling and all these factors, you don't have to worry about that. You have to just take care of all these things like limitations, like So rest of the thing will be taken care by MuleSoft, basically. Okay, it doesn't consume any extra vCore. It doesn't deploy any separate application like when you are enabling unifying when you try to unify the schemas, right, into when you try to unify the APIs, it doesn't mean it will go and deploy any application into a runtime manager. It doesn't do that. Okay, so it doesn't yeah, so it doesn't consume any extra vCores basically.
Okay, I understood. Thank you.
It's a managed service.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me check. Yeah, Sumit, like still that is not that mature. This is the good question basically. So right now, like anything like so right now that maturity level is not there. Like if any one call failed, right? So you can see the data from other, but it will also show the exception with. You can see the data from other other API request, but the one which failed, right? For that it will show the exception, Sumit. But you like right now you don't have that capability. You handle the exception. It will be taken care by like default exception handling at a like the Anypoint DataGraph. Okay, so generally let's consider you are calling three API: account, transaction, and balances. I got the proper response from account, I got a proper response from the transaction, but balances got failed. So you will see data for accounts and the transaction, but with the balances you will see the exception, data phase exception or something like that. Okay, Sumit. Mohit, like GraphQL is a open source. Like, okay. Yeah, see, Anjali, this restriction is common across all the environment, common across all the subscription. Okay. So right now, see, it is in initial phase. Like it will get mature going forward, right? Right now, it's only support the get method. You can able to fetch the data, right? But you cannot go and post, or you cannot go and like delete data basically using graph Anypoint DataGraph. Mohit, like GraphQL, so GraphQL is free basically, but Anypoint DataGraph, it's a MuleSoft managed service, right? So it will definitely have a cost basically. Sumit, have I answered your question, Sumit? Yes, reader. It's very low, but these are the limitations there. Like right now, no, it in future I don't know. So like, what is the like future roadmap? Whether like it will getting, I think it will be increasing future, but right now it's a new feature, right? So it will definitely get more and more mature and more enhanced, basically.
So, hello, hi, this is Mohit here. So, I
Yeah,
was more coming from the fact of in GraphQL you have mutation and query, you have a
yeah.
subscription thing also. So, not in terms of using the API, the cost associated with, but the subscribing for an event in GraphQL. So, just like we do mutation and query,
Hmm.
we can subscribe also for events in
Yeah, right.
GraphQL. So,
Yeah,
that
but
is there.
right now, no. Right now, it's only support. It can call the underlying API basically with having the get method basically, right? Apart from it, it doesn't support mutations and all those things right now. Okay, right now it is not supporting all these capabilities. Okay. So it will enhance in future. So like you are right, like mutations and all those things, like so GraphQL have more like other more features like mutations and all, like what you mentioned, right? So right now it only is like it is just starting, right? So it going forward it will definitely support all these things. Okay, but not now. Like I so generally, like what is the roadmap? So right now I'm not aware of that basically. Okay, so we will see one use cases. So where let's consider like I have already open banking API basically, which have endpoints like account transactions and the balances basically. But the requirement is that I have a multiple customers. The one customer just want first name, last name, and account details, few account details. I have a second customer who want like some separate field, like he also want address and all this data, like website details and everything, right? So like the requirement is like there are some consumer who require separate different field, there are some consumer who require different field. Generally what we do, we will create a experience API. Like at experience layer, what we will do, we will create a different API for like a channel specific API. For UX we will create separate API, for mobile application we will create separate API, because only the requirement is like for mobile application it required two field, for like web application it required 10 fields, right? So is there any way like we can like reduce the development efforts basically? So that is where Anypoint data graph come into picture. So this is the illustration. So where like you can see like mobile app and like web application is will connect to Anypoint data graph or GraphQL. The GraphQL will connect to account REST APIs, and it will try to fetch the data, like so it will request like that, I want ID first name in the mobile for the mobile application, and I want some more fields for the web application. Okay, so let me show that what are the configuration you need to do that. The first thing, you have to ensure that you have a RAM, you have written the raml basically. So raml must be like, it can be open API specification, or it can be raml basically. It does support two things basically. Okay, so I have this raml. In this raml I have like so like account details, like slash account ID, balances, transaction, customer, all these details, right? Then you have to publish this raml into Anypoint exchange. That is also one of the prerequisite. Once you have done that, then you have to create a API manager basically. You have to publish your API to API manager. So basically I have this open banking API, so I have enabled the API auto discovery for this particular thing. Let me open the Postman also. Okay, I will keep as it is. Then finally, I deployed my application into runtime manager. So I have already APIs running in runtime manager. Okay, so this is my API. So let me copy this API URL, or I having this URL here. Let me copy this. Okay, so I will go to my Postman and I will just say I want to fetch account details. Okay, I fetch all the account details. So you can see that. So I have two accounts. If I want to fetch any specific account detail, but right now my issue is that like I can fetch like all the fields, but my mobile application and web application required a separate fields. In that case, either I will create a experience API for mobile application, and for web application it will like consume extra cores also, because I have to deploy those things. But is there any way like we can make use of Anypoint data graph? So basically if you see, there's a new component in Anypoint platform, that is Anypoint data graph. I can click on this. So what are the prerequisite? You must have a like API specification in raml or open API specific format. It must be published to API manager. Then later it must be also like there must be some application deploy somewhere basically. Okay, so I can say add API. So this is my open banking API. I can say configure URL. Next, so you can select what is the version and all those things. So what is API version? You can confirm the selection. Then I can edit the URL, and you have to provide where is your application implementation, like you are doing in your when you are creating the proxy application. So I'm providing this URL. So this is where my implementation exists. I can say save. Then later you can provide the authentication. So basically, if your downstream API, if your open banking API have any kind of authentication, you can provide that. But right now it just support client enforcement via header, query parameter. And if you have any custom headers or whatever, it doesn't support OAuth and all those things right now. So it suppose, but for me, for my downstream API, I don't have set up any authentication. You can access it directly. In case if you have something called client ID enforcement with header, you can provide your client ID and the client secret. Let's consider if I applied any policies, client ID enforcement policies on my API. So you have to provide all those things here. Okay. So I don't have anything. So I will just say next previous schema. Then here you can see like what are the methods like accounts, account balance by account ID, accounts by account ID. These are all the methods that it get it from the RAML. Then you have account type. So what are the different fields in account type? What are different field in place? So it create a graph of your fields basically. Okay. So transaction type, you can see that, so what are the different methods supported by this transaction type? Those kind of things is available. Next, you can say edit schema. So right now I don't have to do anything. So I want to keep all the method visible. If you want to hide anything, you just say, I want to hide this, and I will say add to unified schema. So once I will say proceed to unified schema. So it will take at least 2 to 3 minutes. So it is updating. So any before that, any question? Sir, it is not always right. Okay. So this is not always right basically. Okay. Like basically, at least it required RAML and like it must be deployed to Anypoint exchange. Okay. And like your API, whatever API you're deploying in runtime manager basically, right? So that should like that should like that should like I will tell you like that should be like supported that particular ramal basically. That should be in the same request response format which you have defined in ramal. I will give one more example, Harshad. Like you can also use this for non-MuleSoft application also basically. You don't always require API manager at least, Harshad. Okay, so you don't require API manager always. I will tell you. So let's consider I have a non-MuleSoft application basically, right? I have deployed like somewhere else basically. So what you can do, you can create the RAML for that non-MuleSoft application, which match the like that non-MuleSoft application. And like when you are configuring like your Anypoint DataGraph, you have to just give the separate URL basically. I will tell you when I added that API manager URL, instead of API manager URL, you can give some like different URL where your application exists. Is this clear? I will show you next demo what you can do. Yes, Sridhar, it is possible. It is quite possible. You can do that. So there are some configuration needs to be do. You can do that. We need to add some mapping rules and like you need to do some configuration. It is possible. So you can like run your Anypoint DataGraph in VPC also. Okay, it is possible. Okay. Arshad, I will show you that. Okay. So Arshad, I can show you right now if possible. If you see this API detail where I give this API URL, right? Instead of that, you can give this other URL basically. Okay. So like you don't have to always use API, and it is not compulsory basically. Even you can use this for non-MuleSoft application also. It is possible. Just make sure like that particular non-MuleSoft application is accessible by the data graph basically. That's only requirement. But also it should have a like RAML or Open API specification. Okay. I'm waiting. Is this deployed? Yeah, you can see this is up to date now. Okay. So now what you can do, I will go back to my Anypoint data graph. So I can go to list of APIs, and here we have something called run query. So you can create some application. I will create new application. So I want to generate client ID and client Surat demo. Create and request access. Okay. So now here MuleSoft provide an interface where you can check your query basically. So now I want to fetch the account detail. So I can say account, and like account have a one query parameter that is customer ID, which is 123. And what I want first name, I want last name. Okay, I just want two fields. I will just request that. So I got only first name and the last name. Okay. Now I have other application who wants age address also. I will request for address. I got the address also. So there are some other application who require like account type also, and also require account ID. We can request like that. So you get all these things, right? Okay. So I got all this data. So here, if you see like my use case, like so like different channel or different consumer want different field. So where the Anypoint data graph is also very important. The other thing, now the some customer may like want the data in some order basically. So he want ID at the top, right? So basically you can say ID at the top, and like you want first name, account type you want like after ID. Okay, you can run the query. So you can see like you got ID, account type. It also done the sorting for you, right? So you can request the field in the order that you want basically. Simple, right? So that is also one of the thing you can achieve from the data graph. Okay. So this is my first use case. Now, if you want to run your data graph from your, Postman, what you can do? So you can click here, copy. This is your data graph, a single data service endpoint. You can copy this. You can go to Postman here. So basically we have to use the post method when we are sending data, because it will contain body, right? So for when it contain body, we always use the post method. So you can use GraphQL. So I will pass my graph query here. Okay. The next thing I will send it. So let's see what errors. It will give authentication data because I have to pass a client ID and the client secret also. Okay. So this is my client ID. You can see it here. I will send the request. I got the successful response like this. So you can see that, right? So I got that successful response. Any question on this? I will go with second use case. See, generally, Amit, like, so I will tell you, like, it. You can also sometimes there might be possibility like you can also implement like let consider like you just have to simply. I will give one use case. You have a system API, right? So why we create process API for a like for orchestrating or like choreograph the like calls, right? Or to write some business logic basically, right? That's why we write a process API. Then why we write the experience API? Like we can have a channel specific API, right? Like for mobile application, for web application, for third any other party, right? So that's why we write the API led connectivity architecture. Let consider I have a simple requirement. I have a system API like which fetching the data from like end system basically, and like now I have a mobile application and I have a web application. The web application want to fetch account transactions and the balance data. My mobile application just want to fetch the account data, right? So in that case, why I will use process layer and the experience layer? I can directly call my a system layer, right? And the choreography and the orchestration of multiple call can be done by any point data graph. Correct, Amit? Right. So if you have a simple use case like where you have to just orchestration of multiple call or choreography of aggregating of data basically, right? So in that case you can definitely skip the process layer and experience layer, like and directly you can create any point data graph endpoint basically. But if you have some complex business logic, right, which cannot be handled by data graph also, if you have some like some business logic, like let consider if you are working with some insurance company, so depending on age or something like that, your premium increase or premium decrease, so those kind of things you can handle at a process layer. Then in the top of process layer you can create the anypoint data graph. It depends. So you are Raghav, you are asking about like in anypoint data graph, no, like so generally like anypoint data graph, like the way we are like, so you will get that field as a null basically, Gundeep, like you will get that field as a null basically. Okay. Yeah, the URL Rajshekar which I hit, that is the shared load balancer URL. So basically, like you have to use the Anypoint CLI, like to ensure that like there is some steps you have to perform. There are 8 to 10 steps, 6 to 7 steps that you need to perform to enable the dedicated load balancer for your Anypoint data graph. So you can find the documentation of MuleSoft there. Like right now I don't have Anypoint dedicated load balancer right now. Otherwise I may show you. So it's possible, like you can do that. Okay. Is this clear, Sridharan? So, Sridharan, it is possible. Okay, you can enable dedicated load balancer, but you have to enable. You have to like use some. You have to execute some command on your Anypoint CLI to do that. Okay, it is possible. Right now, it's a shared load balancer URL, but it is quite possible. You can do that. So let me go with the second use case. See, in my second use case, like I want to fetch the data from multiple endpoints in the same APIs. So I have a balance, I have a transaction, I have accounts endpoint in my API. I want to fetch that data, right? So generally, in that case, what we will do if we don't have an Anypoint data graph? So we will have a process API. In process API, and we will have a system API. The system API is like core banking system, which is fetching the transaction accounts and the transaction statement data. But generally we don't do the orchestration of the call in the system API. So generally what we will do, we will have a process layer. In process layer, we will do the orchestration of call. So basically we will call the like accounts API, we will call the transaction endpoint, we will call the balance endpoint. We will aggregate those data at a process layer basically. Okay. So we will aggregate those data at a process layer. Then we will have a like mobile application API, and we will have a web application API in the experience layer, and like mobile can consume its own API, like UX layer can consume its own API. So that will be the approach. But if you are using Anypoint data graph, you don't have to worry about that. Once you have unify your API, like I have open banking API which contain accounts endpoint, which contain transaction endpoint, which contain balances endpoint, right? So what I can do, so in my query, I can request a transaction data, I can request a balance data, I can request accounts data, right? So now, so Anypoint data graph will automatically do the orchestration of the call. It will aggregate the data, it will send the response back to us. So let me show that. You just have, so basically I have already exposed, or I already unify my API, right? So I don't have to unify it again. So what I can do, so basically here it will give some intelligence. So I want to fetch the accounts by account ID. So my account ID is the URI parameter. So I can say 1. So okay. In account ID, I want to fetch a first ID. Then I want to fetch first name. I want to fetch last name. I can say run. So I got that. Now I want to fetch a balance also. So account balances by account ID. Again, I will pass same account ID, which is 1. From balances, what field I want? I want balance type. I want amount. Okay. And I want account ID. Okay. So I will run this query. So I got the balance also, right? I got the balance data. We don't see it done. It automatically done the orchestration of call. So basically, I have a one point where I can fetch the account by account ID. I have a one endpoint through which I can fetch the balance. I can show that. So basically, this is my open banking API directly. So now I have a like account. So it fetching the account data, right? Then I have a one endpoint balances, which fetching the balance data for that particular account. You can see that, right? Then I have a transactions. You can fetch that, right? I can fetch those data. So next thing, I want to fetch a transactions also. So account transaction by transaction ID, account ID is 1. Then I can say I want transactions ID, a transaction date, description. Okay. I can say amount. I can say currency. So these are the fields. I got the transaction data for that particular account. But if you see, these names are not user friendly, right? This account transaction doesn't look good. So what you can do, you can use of alias. So accounts like this. This is my balances. like this. This is my transactions. Okay. So you can see you got the user friendly name, transaction balances. You get your account detail, you get your balance detail, you get your transactions detail. Okay. Apart from that, there is a one features provided by Anypoint DataGraph, which is trace query. So even you can notice like how much time each API is taking to response back, like, so I will just say run query. So if you see, it took 2 milliseconds for parsing, 1 millisecond for validation, then it called the account API, which took 42 milliseconds, then it called balance API, then finally it called the transaction API. Everything got completed within the 67, with less than 67 millisecond, like that. So you can see that, like, so you can get like sometime what happens, some API is not performing well and they're taking a lot of time. So you can, like, you can get that from here, like which API is taking how much time, those kind of things can be checked here. It just provide like which API responds in how much time, basically. So basically you can see that, like, right. So even what can you see, like what is happening here? It do the call in parallel also. You can see that it does the call in parallels, right? So like account started, as soon as like account response haven't come, it started balances also, it started the transactions also. You can see that the call happened in the parallel. So that's why somebody asked me like some like 30 millisecond, 30 seconds is very less for all the responses, but it initiate the call in parallel also, basically. Any question? No, no, like we cannot do the aliasing. I don't think we cannot do. We can do for aliasing for the fields. We cannot. We can We can only do for method. No, no. We have to, like, we have to provide the attribute. Otherwise, the query will fail. Raghav, you have to provide at least one attribute. Otherwise, query will fail. It will not like we have to provide the attribute. That is a compul. See, let's consider. I will give an example. If you are saying select from customer, it will not give any result back, right, Raghav? So we put select star from customers, or like, we say select first name last name from the customer. Similar kind of thing, like, no, I will come on that. Like, so if I have interface output of one API is the input for second API, I want to aggregate output. So, Anu, can you? Uh, I haven't got your question actually. So, can you just like, I will on your mic. It better you can speak on mic. No, cannot see. Yeah. So there is a one more use case which is very important use case. So we will going through that also. Yeah, Anuranjan. Yeah, you can speak, Anu.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, 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 Anuranjan.
Okay, so my first API is employee API and second API is a project API. I want to understand the information. I want all the employee information from the employee table, and I want the project information of those employees from project information. I don't.
Yeah, I'm coming on that use case. Okay, so
Okay,
basically
thanks.
what I will do, so basically you want to set up the relationship between two, like you have two separate API. One is the employee API, one is the project API. You want like you want the data, like I have one employee working on which projects, basically, right? So that must be aggregate, like employee one working on these two projects, that should be part of employee one. Employee two working on this XYZ project, employee three working on PQR project, like those things, right? So I got it. So we will go with this use case also. Don't worry, no, like, we have something like this kind of capabilities also. We will discuss on that. Before that, like, if I go to a third important use case, is there any doubt? No, 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 Anjali, it's a prerequisite. You need to have a API specification, otherwise you cannot do that. So basically, like, let I will tell you, like if you don't have a API specification, then how Anypoint DataGraph will how a Anypoint DataGraph will create the like schema? It requires schema basically. Then it create a graph out of that schema basically, right? Without API specification, you cannot do that. You have to create the API specification. That is the mandatory thing you have to do it. Yeah, Rajiv, you can go ahead. You have a question, right? Rajiv, can you hear me? Hello. I think you have a question, right, Rajiv? What happened to Rajiv? You are. I cannot unmute you, right? You are already presenter, like I don't have option to unmute you. You can yourself unmute. Okay, that's fine. So
Uh,
what I
Jackie, one question, if I can ask in the current example only, which I think my
Mhm.
previous question was
Yes,
not clear. Can you open up the example, please?
yes, I will do that. Just a
Uh,
minute. Yeah, this is my example.
so what has happened? My question was, so on the base, I'm sending account ID as one. I'm getting ID first name and last name, right?
Mhm.
I want put that ID as an input for my second interface. That was my question actually.
So basically, you are saying input for this particular interface, right?
Yeah, will be the output of the first interface.
No, no, I haven't got you. Like So can you repeat once again? So
Accounts is has the we are looking for accounts and values as ID first name and last name, right?
yeah.
This
Mhm.
ID I want as an input for the balance.
Okay, it is possible. I will come on that. Okay, so
Okay,
like
thanks. That's what I want.
so
Later on, if we have on one use case, will be
basically we can define like so basically like if you see like for this API I generally like what happened, like so because like if you see this account balance, it depends on what kind of API specification you are defining, right? So right now if you see this particular method account balances by account ID, right? In this method what happened, like at least you need to pass the account ID. But there are, let's consider, I will come on one use cases, we have some like two different APIs. In one API we have a account detail, in one API we have a customer detail, right? So so whatever like account detail, account ID is a primary key and the customer ID is a foreign key, whereas in customers the customer ID is a foreign key basically, right? And like you can set up the relation like the customer ID in the first response can be used as a input for a second request basically. So that we will going to see, that we will going to see basically. Is this your question, right? Yeah, but in this case I don't think we can do that, right? It is not possible like in this case. Okay, because our RAM API specification is defined in that way only basically. So we have to pass it.
right.
But you can do that, like you have to define your proper API specific. If they are existing different APIs basically, right? Then in that case you can do the relation setup and all those things. Let me show that. You can do that.
Does the execution happens concurrently?
Yeah, it happened concurrently basically in parallel. So basically there is something called enable collaboration, right? You can make use of this. I will show you, like you will get it, like once I will show that example, no, you will understand that. Okay.
Jitendra, can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you said that, this Anypoint graph will have lots of fields, right? And it can serve to many clients. So
Mm-hmm.
my question is, do we have in the platform out of the box functionality to restrict, fields to specific clients? So for example, if we have like, banking application, and then I don't want to show certain fields to certain clients, right? It can be, uh, restricted. So do we have that facility?
No. You can restrict field for all the client, not for specific client. Like if you want to hide this phone number, right? You can
Yeah.
do that. But there is nothing like specific to client. You cannot do that like that. It's
Okay.
there is no such capability right now.
So for that, in that case, then we have to create multiple graphs, right? So that we can assign
No,
certain fields to
but
certain.
it doesn't make sense, right? But you can do that, like see, like you have to give a query to your customers, right? So in that query you don't give that field to your customers basically, so whatever query like first time you have to give at least query to your customer, this query you have to pass it, right? So in
Yeah.
that case you can tell that you can if you for customer xyz you don't want to show account type, you don't give the account type in that query basically,
No,
but
but
right now.
for some clients I have to show, but for some of clients I have to hide.
But the problem is that like for seeing one API you cannot have a two multiple graphs basically, you can have a single graph because it will give the error like ambiguity error because you have accounts ID already there, right? So it will say you are trying to because it work as single network, right? It work as a single data service, so your all method must be unique. In that case you have to create a separate API, then doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense, right?
So you
It
mean,
doesn't make sense.
no, no. So you mean we cannot create multiple data graphs?
No, there will be one data graph for one environment basically, okay? So like there will be one data graph for one environment.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay. Mm, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
but like I think you like for current subscription, but you can buy more subscription also, I'm right? Like you can do that, like you can have a multiple like data graph enabled, that is also possible, like so but I'm not sure, Rajiv, about this. Like whether it's possible to have a multiple data graph because I whatever I've done, right? I've seen only one data graph, but because if you see if there's a restriction, right? One data graph can have up to 155 150 unified schema, right? So you can have a multiple data graph, so I am sure about that. You can have a multiple data graph, Rajiv. So you are right. So like in each data graph, like you can hide or you can visible the field, depend, like but it's not possible you can do client specific, like xyz client can see two fields, like abc client can see three fields. That is not possible.
Right. So a lot of things needs to be done in data graph. Then I mean, going forward.
Yeah, but your question, multiple data graph is possible, I think, but you have to like you have to have a subscription for that basically, for multiple data graphs.
Okay. So that okay, that kind of subscription I need if I want
Yeah.
to have multiple. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so before I am removing this particular data graph right now. So I think there should be some options here. Okay. Okay. Now my second requirement is that, like so I will tell you. So I have like accounts. Okay. I have customers. Okay. So my accounts details, give me accounts detail, and the customer give me a customer details. But there was one customer came to me, like he told me like I want account and customer detail, like I want like who is the customer for that particular account, I want those detail also. In that case what we will do, we will create a process API, or like we will create maybe sometime, like if your process API is already there, in that case we will create a experience layer, or we will create separate process API which will do the orchestration of call, choreography of call, then finally we will create the experience layer. We will give that experience layer access to the client basically. In that case, like we are doing the choreography and the orchestration of the call and aggregating of data at the process layer, which will like fetch the account detail, which will fetch the customer detail, it will aggregate the data and send back to the experience layer. From experience layer it will go back to the end client, right? But is there any way I can do that, right? So let me first show what I have done for that. So I have a design center. So in design center I have a customer API, I have a account API. So this is my account API which contain two methods. So they like fetch all the account, fetch the single account on the basis of account ID. So similarly we have a customers, like fetch all the customers and the fetch the single customer on basis of account ID. So this is my customer. Okay, so I have two methods, customers and the customers ID. Then finally, I have a API manager enabled for both. So I have a customer and I have account API. Okay. Then finally, I will go to runtime manager. So I've deployed my application account data graph API and customer data graph API. Okay. So these are the endpoints. This is my accounts endpoint. Let me show that. And I can say accounts. I'm getting the account details, but customer detail is missing. So if you see, account ID is the primary key here, and the customer ID will be a foreign key in the accounts basically. If I want to fetch any specific account, I can do that also. Then finally, I have a customers. It's customer. I fetch the customer detail, then I can fetch a single customer detail also. Okay, I fetch that. So now I will go to my Anypoint DataGraph. So in this, if you see, the customer ID is the primary key, right? So I will go to DataGraph. I will say add API. First, I will add the customer API. I will say configure URL. So conform selection. So like Harshad, you asked me like, you can add a different URL here if you are not get from Anypoint platform, right? If you haven't configured your API in API manager, you can add directly URL also. Right now, I will use the API manager one. Okay, got it, Harshad? So I want to give where my customer API implementation exists. I will edit the URL. I will give that. I will save it. Then any authentication for underlying API? No, it's open. Preview schema. Now, if you see, I have a customers which have a like age, customer ID, name, and all those things. I will say edit schema. Now you want to click on this customers basically. Now you are adding the schema, and you have something called enable collaboration, which means you are enabling the relationship. You want to enable the relationship between your multiple APIs. So I will say enable. So in this method, like what I have done, I have clicked on these customers basically, like a customers which will like this customers basically which fetch all the data. It should have one method which can also fetch a single customer. So I have a customer by customer ID. I will select that. Next. Then what is the primary key in this? So this is my customer ID. You can see that customer ID is my primary key, and I can say confirm. Okay. Once you confirm, then you can say add to unified schema. Then say proceed to unified schema. So let's wait while it's deploying. So got it, right? So here you will, in this kind of scenario, you should have a one method which can fetch all the data and like which can also fetch the unique data basically, right? So like customer by customer ID will always return a single customer basically depend on the customer ID, right? So I have enabled the collaboration. Now like let's wait while it's updating. So we can add the other API also. If you see right now we have a customer API. Now I will add the accounts API also. So account API, next configure URL. I will confirm the selection. Then I will copy the path of accounts API. Edit the URL. You can say accounts URL, save. Provide authentication. Right now, no authentication. Right now, I will say next edit schema. Here you can see like, accounts ID and all those things. Edit schema. In this edit schema, you click on these accounts. Now you can enable collaboration, accounts by account ID. Next, here my primary key is account ID, confirm. Then also you want to link, you can link. So basically your source is this, and what is your target? So customer. So basically I want to fetch my customer detail, and on what basis? What is my foreign key in accounts, which is the customer ID. So customer ID is the primary key in customer API, and the customer ID is the foreign key in the account API. Just don't forget to click on this save. You are setting up the relationship between both the API. Always make sure you click on this save changes. Then once you have done this, you can add to unified schema. Okay, so if you see customer, and if you see the primary key here, customer, it you can see that, right? Now if you see accounts, in accounts you can see this particular thing because you have linked this with the customer, right? And if you click on customer here, you will see all these fields also. Okay, so what I've done, so in customer, let me repeat. So in customer API, I have set up my customer ID as a primary key. Then I have something called accounts API where I have set up like account ID is the primary key. Then I have enabled the linking between a customer and account, where the customer ID is the foreign key in the accounts API, and the customer ID is the primary key in the customer APIs. Okay, so let me go back to data graph. Okay, so I can say unified schema. I can run the query. I can remove this one. The first thing I can say customers. I want to fetch the customer first name, first name, last name. Let me run a query. So I got first name and the last name. Also, I want age. I want address. Run the query. Okay. So I got all this data. So I'm showing you one more example. Customers. So customer by customer ID. So customer ID is my URI parameter. So I can say one. I think it's one only. I can run it. So I got a unique customer ID basically. Okay. So I can say customer ID. So I got the customer ID. I'm waiting for my accounts to get updated. Let me check if accounts is working. No, still accounts is updating. So it's reducing a lot of overhead, right? Lot of maintenance. Like you don't have to create every time a new APIs and all those things, right? Every time, like it is sometime what happens, we start creating new API, new experience layer, new process layer, those kind of API, right? So we can avoid that. Yeah, Mohit. Like, see, let's consider like I'm trying to fetch the account. I will show you that, in demo. Let accounts to be updated. Here you can see like you have two APIs. I will show what is happening. Sridhar, like can we have more than one contract created for single query? What does this mean? Like, contract, like you will have a one schema, right? For each and every API, like, if you have one method, like that will be associated with one schema basically, right? But it depends, like you can pass like contract when you say if you want two fields, three fields, like you can do that, right? That's what we have done right now. It takes up to 5 minutes, sometime up to 15 minutes, like, depend. The response are not that still mature, like, so you can see the what are the different response and everything here. No, right now there is a node connector basically. Is there any way if we need to change collaboration, like changing the primary key, linking attribute between APIs? Uh, you can change all. You can always change the primary key. You can do that, Raghav. You can do that. Like you can set up the relation depending on your requirement, right? So it is not always like account ID is a primary key. It can be customer name. You can also have a primary key. Depend like what kind of requirements you have. Like what, like it depend on your requirement basically. Okay, you can link any attribute. It not necessary account ID. No, it doesn't come. It's a separate service basically. Okay, Aniruddha, it's a separate service. You need to check with sales, MuleSoft sales. Sales team, like what is the cost for that. So right now I don't know what is the cost, but yeah, correct, Amit. You are right. You can link any attribute, but it must be unique basically. Okay, now my both API has been deployed. So now what I will do? So let me check accounts. Okay. So accounts. In account, I have a account ID. I have account type. I will run the query. I got account type, but I also want a customer details, right? So customers. Okay. So in customer detail, I want first name. I want last name. I want age. Okay, I will send. Here we also fetching like who is the owner of that particular account, like so first name, last name. So basically if you see, like if I pass a customer ID here, so you will come to know. So you can see, like for this particular account he is the customer, for this particular account he is the customer, like that. So you can get all this data also. Now what I will do, I will change bit. So here I can get a single account with the customer details also. So in middle, what will happen? Let consider, like I will remove all this thing. I will keep it simple. So what will happen? Like so basically, if you see, there is a one, like when let me show you here also. If I see the accounts, you can send the request. It should be account then. So we got, see, in accounts we have a field called customer ID, which is the foreign key here, right? So in this case, what will happen? So like when it will fetch all the accounts, then one by one in parallel, it will try to call the customer API, the customer by ID, right? So that it will pass that 120, like a customer ID, which we fetch in the account API, right? It will like it will pass to that API and it will try to fetch. So let's see, like if we have a five APIs basically here. We have a five, like in response we have a five objects basically, 1 2 3 4 5. So it may call a customer API by ID, customer by ID API for 5 times to fetch, but it happens everything in parallel and it automatically handled by Anypoint DataGraph. We don't have to worry about all this orchestration of the calls. So that is how you can enable a relationship between your multiple APIs. So if you see, my customer and account API exist in the different are altogether different API, but we have set up the relationship between both API, and we try to face the account detail and the customer detail. In case if we are not doing that, if we are not using Anypoint data graph, you have to do everything at a process layer, and finally you have to expose the experience layer, which can be consumed by your consumer basically. You can cancel, you can update the collaboration, right? Raghav, you can do that. You don't have to do it, don't have to delete it. Why you will delete it, right? If you want to enable the, like, change the collaboration, you just have to change it, like, it's simple, like, so you can go to list of API added, you can go to account API. Okay, in account API, you can click on these accounts and like you can change it. See, you have an option to change this. We have it. Yeah, you can do that. It is possible. Why you cannot call? Right? You can always call Jyoti. You can always call that. HTTP requester. You can always call that API. As like it's simple. Like you just have to pass the client ID and the client secret in the header, right? And you can always pass it. You can do that. Just you have to like ensure that there is a connectivity between. Even you can do for non-MuleSoft application, right? Just you have to like ensure that there's a VPC exist and like there's a VPN tunnel and everything is there to like to set up the like. See, basically, I will tell you. Anypoint DataGraph is the service. It's a cloud service basically, right? So initially, the first thing, it can only access the SaaS based application or like application which is available publicly, URL which is available publicly. In case your application API deployed on premise, correct? So they cannot directly access it, right? The Anypoint DataGraph cannot directly access it. In such cases, you need to set up the VPC, VPN, and all this kind of setup should be there basically. Correct, Aniruddha? Otherwise, it's not possible. Even you can use non-MuleSoft API. You can always call the non-MuleSoft API also, which is just you have to add the different URL instead of API implementation URL. You just have to add the different base URL. But you have to ensure that the RAML or Open API specification is defined very well. Yes, it has to be. Yeah, let me show that. It will not show that like I will show you, but it will not get into that depth. So see, so it call like if you see it keep on calling customer for each and every request, right? It is calling that, right? For each and every request, it is calling the customers API. You can see that it call customers API, it call customers API, it calls customers API. You can see that, right? So if you see the overall, it took 121 like milliseconds basically. If I do this, so you can see it always call the customers API. You can see everything is in parallel basically. You can see that. Then accounts API took 83 millisecond. After that, like it it does the call in parallel, which like the whole request almost completed in 121 milliseconds. Yeah, Open API specification and RAML both works. Okay, say they both works. Zero downtime deployment. Arshad, like here, like we don't have to worry about like deployment. Like, when you say zero downtime support, yeah, yeah, it's support. I will tell you, like if you have deployed some schema basically, and if you try to modify that schema, right, the previous version is not like previous version will be active till the new version is completely deployed, Harshad. So what can you custom code in the sense like Anypoint DataGraph, you cannot write any custom code. I will not say layer above the GraphQL, but it is like the whole principle behind the data graph is a GraphQL basically. The principle behind the data graph is a GraphQL only. Okay, no. See, custom code you can definitely write, right? But on Anypoint data graph, you cannot write any custom codes for now. Like there's a no possible. It's completely configuration, Mohit. Okay, so stop sharing for now. Just let me open the questions. So I will share my screen again. Error scenario, like I need to prepare for that. Like, let me check. Even you are passing some wrong, no, it will give the null. See, I haven't prepared any error scenario, but I will. What I will do, I will prepare one thing on that. Okay, so I can pass it to everyone. Is this okay, Tanmay? I will prepare something on this. No, if I disable, you can do that also. That is also so it will give data phase exceptions, some kind of thing. Let me do that also. Yeah, this is the good idea actually. I can do that also. Let me copy this query. I can go to runtime manager. It will give me a data fetch exceptions basically. I can stop this basically. So let me run it. So see, so I got the, as I mentioned, I got the customer data, like account data, but customer data is null. And if you see, I got data fetch exceptions. So basically you can see like, so there are 5 customers, right? So for 5 customers, so you can see the 5 error, the data fetch exception. We cannot do anything with this, like, so this is the generic error generated from data, like, data graph. But apart from this, you can see the accounts data, which is available. Okay, let me, here you can see lot of error because you have 5 accounts, so it may requested for the 5 time, right, the customer API. So it give the aggregated errors basically. Okay, so let me give one other example. Here I got the account data, but if you see the only error, we have a one error because it may requested customer details for 1 time basically, right? That's why. So this is the generic error we got, errors. So, and data basically, this is the data from accounts API, but customer is null, and we got the errors also. Yeah, Amit, thank you. Okay, so should I start with the first question? Let me put line here. See, post doesn't work, right? Post doesn't work. As I mentioned, like it doesn't support post method basically. And no, it doesn't support post method for underlying API. So just I'm first question is, what is the maximum limit of concurrent call per unified schema? Answer A is 150, answer B is 1500, answer C is 15, or answer D is 1000. What is the answer? Yeah, yeah, it's done. Answer is 150. Let me check. Not A. I think it's A. Yeah, answer is A. Mohit Sharma, Praveen Sundar, and Jyoti Nimbalkar. Mohit Sharma, Praveen Sundar, Jyoti Nimbalkar. Okay. So I will just spin up the wheel the for first winner. Mohit Sharma is the winner for this question. Mohit, could you please share your email ID quickly? So Mohit, can you please give me your email ID? So Mohit, like you are not eligible for like next question because you already won one. Stop sharing. Let me take out the second question. I'm sharing my screen again. Can you see my screen? Okay. So what is the timeout limit per call? 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 years? Per call basically, not per query. So per call is it's a 5 second basically. Okay. So it's 5 second. Answer is A again. Let me check where I put line. Sridhar is I right. Let me check. Sridharan Rajsekar. Second is yes, Amit Kumar Singh. Mohammed. I'm putting these three names. Let's see who is the winner. Sridharan Rajsekar is the winner. Can you give me your email ID quickly? Sridharan, can you give me your email ID? Now I will go with third question. I hope everybody can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay. I'll just I'll put the line here. Because just I'm opening the question. So what is the maximum number of selected fields per query? 10, 50, 100 or 150? Answer is C 100. Okay, so let me check who gave the answers right. Anup Jain, Amit Rawat, and Tanmay Kukar. Yeah, Anup Jain is the winner. Can you please ping me your email ID, Anup? Okay. So guys, like you will be receiving a feedback form after this session. So I expect like everybody should give the feedback, so which will help us to improve in the futures also. Like so Rajiv, Rajiv Mathur, you can on the camera. Like if anybody wants to on the camera, he or she can do that. Rajiv, like we have set up the next speaker here, like on 28th of August, basically. Rajiv Mathur. So anybody want to become a speaker, like he or she can connect me, over the LinkedIn or like can send me an email, so I can publish the event for them. Okay. So guys, please give the feedback. So it will be useful. So yeah. So I will close this session. If you have any question, you can reach me on LinkedIn or and wherever you like. Yeah. So yeah. So thank you so much for joining today's session. And enjoy the Sunday. Bye bye.